La cicatriz llevaba 19 años sin dolerle. No había nada de qué preocuparse. That's it. Oof. Took me a whole year. All 7 books, over 4,000 pages. Fuck. Oh, man. That was crazy. And yeah, definitely helped a lot with my Spanish to go through all that. And we'll talk about that tomorrow when I'm in a little better lighting and it's not 1 o'clock in the morning. One thing I did want to show though is vocabulary. I looked up stuff all along the way. That was one good indicator that my Spanish was improving a lot because I wasn't looking up as many words. But this Google Translate is pretty awesome. You can always play and listen to see how every word sounds after you enter it in. Besuqueándose. So that's pretty cool. You can see saved here. This is a 699 page book. And what is that, 357? So I was like, it's 6 words per page in book 1. So I was just over 1 lookup every 2 pages by book 7. But anyway, I saved all those in 7 different spreadsheets for the 7 different books. And if anybody wants that, I'm happy to leave links to it if you want to try learning Spanish with some Harry.
Hey, just some thoughts on Harry Potter. Reading it to learn a foreign language, and was it worth it? What did it do for me in my language abilities? I read all 7 books of Harry Potter in Spanish, and I think, I've followed the advice of Steve Kaufman, Stephen Krashen. These guys are like the reading champions of how important reading is in your own language as well as for learning a foreign language. Something about seeing it written, being able to go through the material and understand it at your own pace. You can go through and maybe look up a few words, and you can actually go through and understand several paragraphs. Whereas if you hear several paragraphs spoken and you're not very strong in the language, you're probably not, you might hear a few words you recognize, but you're not going to be able to make any sense of that. So it allows you to slow down, go through, decode the language. You're having so many different ahas throughout. Oh, that's how you say that. That's how they say that. Oh, interesting. That's kind of like a saying we have in English, but it's, it's not a piece of cake. It's pan comido. It's eaten bread, right? So it's really interesting to go through, decode, and just through repetition. You don't really have to study vocabulary. Just through repetition, you see a word, you look it up. If it's a frequently used word, you're going to see it the next page, the next page after that, and the next page after that. So even if your language learning skill, even if your language skills are not very strong, I don't think you need to wait a long time to start reading. I started out, not with Harry Potter, but with books before I read Harry Potter, just having the English version on one side, Spanish version on the other. And then I went through line by line, looking back and forth, which is tedious. It was hard. It hurt my brain. I could only do 2 pages a day. That's how much I could get done in an hour, was 2 pages. And once I got it to the point where it was just 5 or 6 lookups per page, I'm only looking, over at the other page just a few times per page. Then it was like at a point where I'm like, okay, I'm ready to ditch the English version on the side and having to look back and forth between the two, which is just torture. And just actually read a book and look up anything that I don't know, that's, preventing me from being able to understand what's going on and enjoy the book. So that's where I started with Harry Potter. Book 1, I was looking at 5 or 6 words a page, and in an hour reading session, I was averaging probably like 6 or 7 pages. So I read, the Harry Potter series is over 4,000 pages, and I read it in about a year, 365 days in a year. There were maybe, there's probably 330-ish days where I read, maybe 320 where I actually read, maybe 30 or 40 where I didn't do any reading at all for whatever reason. Too much work or traveling or whatever. And so if you look at the averages there, that's maybe like 12 pages per day. And then I would say I was reading I was spending maybe an hour to hour and 20 minutes on average, I would say, per reading per day. But that's like with a lot of breaks. I don't like to just strain my eyes and strain my brain for that long without breaks. So maybe I'm going an hour. So I'm saying I'm averaging 12 pages an hour with my reading. And I know one thing that it did for me, and one thing that it helps me feel like this was a good investment of my time, because I invested solid like 350 hours at least into reading these 4,000 pages. And that's how I gauge it. 350 hours spent doing this is going to give you how much of a language gain. I think that's what everybody wants to know and needs to know to determine whether it's worth it to read. So I look at that, and like I said, I was averaging maybe 6 or 7 pages, something like that, per hour. And by the end, I'm reading, I'd say right around 18 pages an hour. So really close to tripling my reading speed, meaning that I can go through and understand, 3 times as fast. I'm still stopping to look up words, so it's not like I'm reading at that slow of a pace continuously. It's the breaks to look up words. It's maybe the sentence where I'm like, wait a second, and then I have to really break it down and spend like a full minute breaking down a sentence, and maybe I have to type in a whole thing into my phone, a whole sentence, just to make sure that I understand it. That's kind of what slowed me down. If I was reading continuously, like I can read at a pretty normal pace. I'm a slow reader in English. I read about 30 pages an hour, and then my goal was to get there in Spanish. The thinking there was that if I can, spoken Spanish is estimated to be at, everybody speaks at a different pace, but it's estimated to be 220 words per minute. And so that's, that's a little bit faster than 30 words per hour, or 30 pages per hour in a typical book. But that was my thinking. If I could read it that fast, then when it comes at me that fast out of somebody's mouth, I should be able to comprehend it really, really well. And that's kind of how it's gone. My ability to process it. To me, language is more about speed than anything else. I mean, you need to learn what the words mean, but being able to process it really quickly and, not have to sit there and think about what it all means, because you're so familiar with it that it just, automatically hits your brain and instantaneously you know what it means. To me, that's what I mean by, language learning a foreign language being, a big component being speed. So anyway, I tripled my consumption speed of Spanish, which is great. If I look at my last book, I think I showed it to you guys. I'm looking up about a one word every 2 pages. And so before it was like, I started at 6 or 7. So what is that? I'm looking up 12 times fewer words. So that's a good indication of how much my vocabulary expanded during that process. So the first book, by the end of the first book, I was like 4 point something words per page. So even from the first page of the first book to the last page, I'd already improved my vocabulary by enough to where I know 2 more words per page, right? So that's pretty significant. To know 2 more words per page than you used to know is, that's a big jump. Every 100 pages, if you're looking up 2 fewer words because you know them, that's a 200 word vocabulary increase that you've had. So, that's probably a pretty good indication. I would say just throughout the process, if I had to estimate, I probably learned an average of 1 word per page. And so that's an increase of, vocabulary increase of like 4,000 words from an activity that takes 365, took me 350 hours to do. Could you learn vocabulary faster with flashcards? Definitely. I think flashcards are much more efficient. But is it fun? Are you consuming it in context? Are you seeing all the different uses of the word and seeing what it's paired with? You're not. So I think, your actual fluency and ability to use the language and understand it automatically and quickly, and just your intuitive sense and ability to just use it is vastly improved by, of course there's a dog whining, of course it's vastly improved shut up, cállate. It's vastly improved by reading versus vocab. And studying vocabulary for most people and doing like, Anki flashcards and stuff like that is not very fun. So, uncovering and decoding a story and finding out what everything means and following along a storyline is, first of all, it's more memorable. It's really sticky in your mind. You can remember, like I can remember words that I learned. I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. The first time I encountered the word like taladro or drill was because of Tio Vernon, Uncle Vernon, worked at the drill shop or whatever. So you form like stronger connections with those. There's kind of like a mental story in your head that's associated with that word, with that phrase, with that saying. I remember Harry saying like "si me da la gana," like that just stuck. Like I'll forever know what that means. Like if I want, it's like a way of saying if I want to, I'll do whatever I want. He says that in like a really powerful moment in one of the scenes. So I think you're forming, you're getting language used in context, which is way more powerful. That's pretty good. What else is I going to say about it? Yeah, for me, that was the biggest things to monitor is like how much did my reading speed improve? How much more was I able to consume per day? Now, getting close to 20 pages an hour in reading time, I'm consuming 7,000 words, let's say, per hour. That's a lot. Now I'm comprehending that. So I'm getting, if you study language learning at all, it won't take you long to come across the concept of comprehensible input. And the idea there being that, understanding what you're hearing or reading, and doing a lot of that, the quantity of comprehensible input that you're getting is what determines your language growth. And for me, you can measure that in words. If you're consuming 7,000 words a day of comprehensible input, that's a lot. But I hope to get my reading up over 10,000. Now I continue 10,000 words. I'm expecting to read, if I read 4,000 pages in the last year, and I read some extra stuff too, so maybe 4,500 in the last year. I expect to go way over 10,000 this year because my reading speed has improved. So I should get double the Spanish or more comprehensible than I got in the first year. So I'm expecting the language gains to actually improve, where things get more intuitive, more easy, rolls off the tongue faster. My brain doesn't have to work so hard to recall words that I've learned but maybe haven't encountered in a few weeks. I'm like really grinding to remember like what is that word again? How do they say that? So that's to me like the benefits of the reading. But you can definitely, I think reading is a really powerful language learning tool. I know it's tough. I wasn't a huge reader and didn't read fiction before I read Harry Potter. I'd never read Harry Potter before. And it's just to have a book that has that much quantity and you can get engaged, the characters, and you can stick with it, so you don't have to like, every time you open up a new book, it's kind of like you're experimenting to see if it's something you're interested in, and often it's not. And you never get engaged with the story, and then that's kind of a waste. Once you're engaged and you're following a storyline, it's nice to have 4,000 words of that. Same thing with TV shows. If you have a show that has 100 episodes, if you're engaged with it, watch all 100 episodes. Like, it's great to have a show that has a huge quantity of episodes that once you're engaged, now you're in it, and now you've got hundreds of hours of content that you can consume that you're going to be engaged with. To me, that's the beauty of Harry Potter, is just the sheer volume of having a 4,000 plus word or 4,000 plus page series that's an engaging storyline that you can follow along, that's written fairly straightforwardly without, too complex vocabulary. It's not written on the same, it's not written super adult level, but it's very, very close. If you're fluent enough to just understand every single word of that thing effortlessly at your normal reading speed in your native tongue, you're going to be really happy with your language abilities in that foreign language. And you won't feel like you missed out on anything by not reading a bunch of John Grisham translated into Spanish or whatever. So anyway, I think it was great, and I can't wait to read more books. I've started on Hunger Games. I've got, 100 Years of Solitude and Life in, was it the cholera one? Yeah, that one. But yeah, I'm excited to read some classics now in Spanish, and I got a little bit of nonfiction I'm going to tear into. I've read one nonfiction. It was okay, but I'm excited to read more stories. And of course, reading alone is not sufficient. You really need to hear a lot. So my plans with Harry Potter now, I've kind of been dedicated to this idea of like no study language learning. Nobody studies to learn their native language. They just pick it up from exposure. I was trying to do that, the kind of natural way of language learning as much as possible, but I have these huge vocabulary lists from Harry Potter. If I look back to my vocabulary list from book 1, I managed to learn most of those words through reading the other 6 books. So you learn a lot of vocabulary naturally through the reading process, just through repetition and seeing it in all different contexts, and then you don't have to study vocabulary. But I'm thinking I will now, since I have all 7 books, I've purchased many of the audiobooks on Audible. What I'd like to do now is study book 1's vocabulary, see the words and the phrases that I still didn't learn through reading all 7 books, and study that while listening to audiobook 1. So that gives me some repetition. I hear that it's not going to be hard study. Like, it's going to be glancing through the spreadsheet at my vocabulary list and being like, okay, that means that. Okay, that means that. That means that. Got it. And then hearing it in the story again, I think should help solidify that. And, I haven't tallied up all the different vocabulary lists and how many words that I have, but I don't know, it's probably like 4,000 or 5,000 words that I and phrases. Like I said, I probably learned a bunch of them already, but I think if I go through that process, I can go through it relatively quickly, get a ton more audio, and then I'm anchored to the story. I know the story, so like it doesn't. If I get a little lost with my understanding, it doesn't take long to like encounter a part where I'm like, oh yeah, that part, and then you're back in the story again. I noticed, like, just listening to audiobooks you've never read or heard before from scratch, if you get lost at all, it's really easy to just drift, and then the next 5 minutes later you're like falling asleep. That's my experience with audiobooks. So I'm excited to get a huge quantity of audio from going through the audiobooks again, studying vocabulary along with that. So it's going to be one of the most tedious things I've done in my language learning, since the beginning. The beginning I was studying grammar and vocabulary and doing like kind of like a school style of learning. But I would say, maybe just a month or 2 of like studying some vocabulary and like listening to phrases, finding some videos on YouTube or something where they're just saying phrases and what they mean for an hour. Familiarizing yourself with the basic words and phrases, that's plenty to open up a book and start messing around with it. And like I said, it's going to be tedious, but you're starting out at 2 pages a day, and then like 2 weeks later you're at 3, and you're like, whoa, that's 50% improvement. That's huge. And once you get hooked on that process and the improvement, and you're like, ooh, what about 4? Ooh, I read 5 pages an hour, and wow, like I read 8 pages today, and whoa, I'll never forget, like, the first time I read a whole page without needing to look something up. It was like, I felt like I won the Super Bowl or something. So to me, it's like getting on that journey of making progress, being able to monitor your progress, and you can jump into reading right away. And if it's tedious, it's no big deal. You just put in your hour, do the best you can, and do it daily, and it won't take you long before you're cruising and making progress. And once you're making progress, then forget about it, like you're hooked. But yeah, the goal for me always has been to get to my reading speed in English in my foreign language. And if I wasn't doing word lookups, I would be really close. Like, I'm 80% there. And I'm gonna read a bunch more books, go back through Harry with the audiobooks and a little vocabulary study, and keep making progress. I've got at least another 16 months that I've I've set out to do 3 years of study dedicated daily, and 20 months down, 16 to go, and it's really fun. I'm just doing what I would do in English, but in Spanish. Read books, watch videos on YouTube, listen to little audiobooks, podcasts. I'm basically just being lazy in a different language. But this vocabulary study and going back through the audiobooks is going to be a little bit of effort. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's not criminal to put effort into your language learning. But we'll see if I can stick with that. But yay for Harry. It's a great series to learn a foreign language with, just because it's engaging, it's written in simple language, and it's massive, 4,000 plus pages. So anyway, that's it. And